Temu loses roughly $30 on every order it ships to the United States. In 2024, it ran 6 Super Bowl commercials in a single game at around $7 million each. The math is so bad it looks like a mistake. Except the company behind Temu isn't a desperate startup. PDD Holdings is a NASDAQ-listed giant with over $130 billion, sitting on more than $60 billion in cash and short-term investments, built by a former Google engineer who briefly became the richest person in China. So, either Temu is the dumbest business on the internet or something else is going on. And it turns out Temu was never really in the business of selling things. It was in the business of buying you. The whole strategy worked exactly as designed, right up until May 2025, when the United States quietly ended the trade loophole that made the entire model possible. If you've spent any time in the United States in the last 3 years, you've seen Temu. The ads are everywhere, on Facebook, on Instagram, between innings of baseball games, and yes, 6 times during a single Super Bowl. The jingle is unforgettable, in roughly the way a car alarm at 3 a.m. is unforgettable. Shop like a billionaire, a cartoon shopper buying a smartwatch for under $9, a dress for $9.39, a blender for $12. The pitch is simple. Products that should cost $50 at Target sit on Temu for $5. Temu, launched in September 2022, is the international arm of a Chinese e-commerce giant called PDD Holdings. PDD is technically headquartered in Ireland, and Temu itself is registered in Boston, but the operation runs out of China. The products ship from Chinese factories. The company is mostly staffed by Chinese employees, and PDD's other big business is a Chinese shopping app called Pinduoduo that almost no American has ever heard of. Now, if you ask the average American how Temu can sell things this cheap, you'll get one of 3 answers. Chinese government subsidies, slave labor, or it's a scam, and the products will fall apart in a week. There are real questions about labor conditions and product quality on Temu. Those questions exist, but none of those answers actually explain the business model. Because here's the thing, PDD Holdings isn't desperate, it's wildly profitable. Pinduoduo is the 3rd largest e-commerce platform in China, behind only Alibaba and JD.com. PDD made over $14 billion in net income in 2025 alone. So, if the parent company is profitable, the US business doesn't have to be. The losses in the United States aren't a side effect, they're a choice. And here's what the choice actually looks like. In 2023, a Wired investigation traced Temu supply chain costs and found that on average the company was losing about $30 on every order it shipped to the United States. China Merchants Securities, a financial firm, put Temu total annual US losses somewhere between $588 million and $954 million. A Goldman Sachs analysis came up with a smaller number, around $6 per order, but the direction is the same. Temu was, by every credible estimate, losing money on every transaction. By 2023, total Temu losses globally were estimated to $8 or $9 billion in a single year. Now, you might look at numbers like that and assume Temu was a desperately failing business, the way you'd look at, say, WeWork in 2019. But the better comparison isn't WeWork, it's Uber. Between 2014 and 2018, Uber lost roughly $4 billion a year subsidizing rides. The losses weren't an accident, they were the strategy. Uber paid drivers more than riders paid, eating the difference, because they were buying behavior. They were paying you in cheap rides to stop calling cabs and start opening their app. By the time the subsidies stopped, the habit was the moat. Temu was running what we might as well call the Pinduoduo playbook. The $30 they were losing on your order wasn't a pricing mistake, it was a customer acquisition cost. And we know this isn't speculation, because the man behind Temu had already run this exact playbook before and won. His name is Colin Huang. He's a former Google engineer who joined the company in 2006, helped launch Google's China operations, and quit in 2007 to become an entrepreneur. In 2015, he founded Pinduoduo. The strategy in China was identical to what Temu would later do in America. Subsidize everything, lose money on every transaction, pay users to invite their friends, make the app gamified and addictive, actual minigames inside the shopping app rewarding you with coupons, burn cash for years until habit took over. It worked. Pinduoduo took 7 years to become profitable in China, but it became the country's 3rd largest e-commerce platform. By August 2024, Huang's personal net worth hit $48.6 billion, briefly making him the single richest person in China, a title he held for 18 days before PDD's stock fell on a disappointing earnings call, and he lost $14 billion in a single day. He still owns roughly 28% of PDD. So, when PDD launched Temu in the United States in September 2022, this wasn't a wild experiment. It was the Pinduoduo playbook, ported to English, funded by a Chinese parent that already knew how the ending was supposed to look. And here's how aggressive the recipe was. In February 2024, during Super Bowl 58, Temu ran the same 30-second commercial 6 times, 3 times during the game, twice more after, plus pre-game. Each in-game spot cost around $7 million. The company also handed out $15 million in-app coupons and giveaways tied to the broadcast. In a single Sunday, Temu spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million on Super Bowl marketing alone, for a company that was losing money on every order that resulted. 21% of viewers surveyed by a research firm called Zappi said they actively hated the ad. The jingle was widely mocked online, and it didn't matter. By the next Temu app downloads had spiked 45%. The hate was the engagement. By August 2024, Temu had 185 million monthly active users in the United States, nearly matching Amazon's shopping app. The company's 2024 gross merchandise volume hit $70.8 billion, making it the fastest-growing e-commerce marketplace in history. Now, you might look at all this and think, surely this is just Chinese dumping. Surely the Chinese government is funding this to undercut American businesses. And here's where the standard explanation falls apart. PDD Holdings is publicly traded on NASDAQ under the ticker PDD. Anyone can pull up its financials. As of December 2025, PDD had $60.4 billion in cash and short-term investments, generated by Pinduoduo's profits in China, not by state funding. The losses in America were commercial money, deployed as a deliberate bet on American consumer behavior. The balance sheet gave PDD the ability to absorb losses that would destroy most retailers. So what was the bet mechanically? The bet had 3 parts. Part 1, get the habit. Temu data showed that once an American consumer placed at least one order, their monthly repurchase rate was around 50%. The average order value was $25. Temu's long-term goal, according to internal targets reported by TechBuzz China, was 30 orders per year per customer at $50 each, $1,500 a year, every year, in perpetuity. The $30 loss on order 1 looks insane against a $25 transaction. It looks completely rational against a $1,500 lifetime customer. Part 2. Make the merchants pay for it. Temu doesn't own inventory the way Amazon does, it runs a platform. Chinese sellers ship their goods through Temu's logistics network, and Temu sets the final price. One anonymous Chinese seller told Wired, quote, "We are working for Temu for free, so Temu can attract more American customers." The platform model meant Temu could push margin pressure down to sellers who had no other path into the US market. And part 3, this is the part everyone misses. Temu's whole model depended on something called the de minimis exemption. Under US trade law, any package valued at $800 or less could enter the country duty-free. No tariff, no customs paperwork. The exemption was originally created in the 1930s to save the government the cost of processing tiny fees. But in 2016, the threshold was raised from $200 to $800. And that single change essentially created Temu's economic model. By fiscal year 2024, U.S. Customs and Border Protection was processing roughly 4 million de minimis packages every single day. 1.36 billion packages a year, accounting for 92% of all cargo entering the United States by volume. A 2023 House Select Committee report estimated that Temu and Shein together were responsible for at least 30% of all de minimis shipments. Every Temu package was duty-free. Every American competitor importing the same goods in bulk paid full tariffs. The $30 loss assumed zero tariff cost. The Pinduoduo playbook in America was a tariff loophole, a deep balance sheet, and a customer acquisition bet, stacked on top of each other. For a while, it worked exactly as designed, and then in 2025, everything broke at once. On April 2, 2025, the White House signed an executive order ending duty-free de minimis treatment for packages from China, effective May 2nd. 4 months later, in August, the exemption was killed globally. The fuel underneath the model evaporated overnight. The damage was immediate. Temu daily U.S. active users fell 48% in May 2025 compared to March, according to Sensor Tower data reported by Reuters. The app dropped from the top of the App Store charts to around number 58 within 3 days. PDD's first quarter 2025 profits fell 38% year over year. Temu pulled almost all of its US digital ads, shifting the spend to the UK and EU. Temu didn't die, it pivoted to US warehouses, to a local seller program, to European markets where rules like de minimis still worked. By quarter 2 2025, according to an HSBC analyst note, 90% of Temu's 405 million global monthly users were outside the United States. And in March 2026, PDD announced a $14 billion three-year supply chain investment plan, explicitly signaling that the blitzscale era was over, and a slow, profitability-focused era was beginning. So here's the broader lesson. The subsidies were never the point. The $30 losses weren't an act of dumping, and they weren't a sign of desperation. They were a bet that a trade loophole would stay open long enough to convert paid customers into permanent ones. The bet won partially. Temu kept roughly half its US users through the loophole closure, and it's now a top 5 e-commerce platform across most of Europe. But the era of losing $30 an order is over, and the real question for the next 5 years isn't whether Temu survives. It's whether the customer habit they bought for $9 billion in 2023 was actually worth $9 billion. Credit where credit's due. Colin Huang ran the Pinduoduo playbook in China for 7 years and won. He may yet run it in the West and win again. Or this may be the first time the playbook has run into a wall it can't subsidize through. Either way, 6 Super Bowl commercials, 3 years of paid losses, and $9 billion on the table. We'll find out in the next 5 years whether that bet was actually worth